This next series of questions is all about lessons. So I'm going to read them all in one hit and then we'll come back and we'll do each one at a time. How do you remember everything you're supposed to say and say it so eloquently and cogently? I feel like sometimes when I go up on a stage to speak, my brain often goes blank and I forget much of what I want to say. Question 2, how do you prepare for your lessons so that you are set up for success? How long does it take for you to prepare? And number 3, what do you do to make your lessons interactive and engaging while you're teaching up the front of the class? All right, first question is about memory. How do you remember everything you're supposed to say and say it eloquently and cogently? The first thing I need to point out about that is that when I am up in front of a class, I don't always remember all the things I'm supposed to say, and I don't always say them eloquently or cogently. In fact, I have 12 years of videos of my lessons that demonstrate that doesn't always happen. And in fact, one of the funny things for me is no matter how much I prepare a lesson and no matter how much I think about all of the different ways that the lesson could progress or the different branches it could take or the different things a student might say in my class that I need to respond to, you can never prepare for everything. Dwight D. Eisenhower famously said that plans are nothing, but planning is everything. Eisenhower was a US Navy admiral, and the point that he was making was you can plan for a battle, but it is completely unpredictable what's actually going to happen on the waves, what your enemy is going to do. Not that students are your enemy, but they will do things that are unpredictable. And so I always have, situations within the classroom where I don't remember the things I'm going to say, or I make a mistake anyway. Like I remember what I'm trying to do, but there's an error, and then I have to fix that up in the middle of my lesson. So don't fall for the illusion. I think the way that Roger Federer said it is that effortless is a myth, okay? There's a lot of time and effort that goes in, and sometimes things go wrong, in fact, quite frequently, right? But that being said, I do work really hard and put a lot of time and thought into trying to remember what I have to say. How does that happen? Well, a couple of ways. Number one, you do have to, and this is part of what the next question is anticipating, you do have to prepare a whole lot. You have to spend a lot of time thinking and planning, and for me, I write out longhand, and I don't type it. Something different mentally, cognitively happens for me when I've got a pen or a pencil in my hand versus when I'm typing. And besides, when I'm teaching, I often have to draw stuff anyway, so it's much easier when I'm writing and drawing. But that planning process, sometimes like I said, I will write out longhand the things that I think of saying in class. I don't stand there and read it off of my iPad while I'm there in the lesson. At least I try not to, because turns out that is not very engaging. But going through that process of planning and thinking and rearranging and re-editing the way that I think my lesson will go, sometimes I'll plan it out, and then in the process of planning I realize I've done it in a really counterintuitive order, and so I shuffle things around, right? How do I remember everything I'm going to say? I spend a lot of time planning it. I think that it's Daniel Willingham who says, memory is the residue of thought. I spend a lot of time thinking about my lessons, and so they sort of burn their way into my synaptic pathways, and that's how I remember things, right? So if you want to remember things, spend a lot of time thinking and planning. And secondly, don't forget, I know if you're watching this, is a good chance you're an early career teacher. I don't think I can call myself an early career teacher anymore, even though I feel quite inexperienced in some areas. I'm not an early career teacher. I've been teaching many years, and so there are lots of things I've taught multiple times. Some things I've taught upwards of 10, 15, 20 times, the same concept, maybe from a different direction or for a different year level or for a different class. Every class is different, but you have the same basic ideas and concepts, and the more you teach them, the more well embedded they get into your mind, and they truly do become second nature. I could walk into a classroom right now and I could teach a lesson on the difference between partition and quotition division, because I am really familiar with those concepts, having taught them multiple times. But that didn't happen the first time. It probably didn't even happen the second time, honestly. It was the third, the fourth, the fifth. The more times you do things, the more reinforced it gets in your mind. So how do I remember stuff? It is through that planning process and also through doing it repetitively. So don't worry, if you go up on stage to speak and your brain often goes blank and you forget stuff, that's actually a very normal experience. And by the way, that is part of why, when I write stuff, even though I try not to go back to my lesson plan, that's why it's there. It's there as like a backup, as a parachute. I remember when I gave my TED talk, it was 12 minutes long, and I memorized it. I spoke it out loud something like 150 or 200 times. But the people who were preparing the conference, they said, even if you feel like you've got it memorized, still print it out and have it in your back pocket, because you never know, like you said, your mind might go blank, and you want to have something to turn back to. So how do you remember? There's no secret to it, at least not for me. I've heard there are lots of different techniques for memory. There's people who they go into like these world memory championships, and they'll literally like memorize a deck of playing cards or many decks of playing cards in order, and they talk about the memory palace and these kinds of techniques. If those are useful for you, then great. But what I would say is, for me, that planning and that practice is probably the main thing. Maybe one more thing to add is that, having helpful structures that you go back to over and over again is really useful, right? So I've spoken to some teachers about having a 3-act structure to your classroom, and I'm not the only person who's talked about this. I think about it in screenwriting or in sort of story terms, narrative terms. We talk about setup, conflict, resolution, right? So you have to kind of establish what's going on in the lesson. You have to introduce some tension or something that's confusing, a problem that is insoluble, that you're like, oh, okay, how could we go about this with our existing knowledge? We can't, so we need to develop something new. That's the conflict. And then resolution. You want to synthesize new knowledge and understanding together in a way that's coherent and makes sense. So having those 3 kind of big blocks, not every lesson that I'm going to teach follows that structure, but a lot of them do. And so being able to use that over and over again, but being able to employ it in different ways, makes things easier to remember, because you think, oh, where am I up to in the lesson? Oh yeah, I'm trying to synthesize, I'm trying to resolve this for my learners. So those kind of strategies can be very helpful.